Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this in the world. I hope you guys are doing okay. And this is going to be my final video for 2024, obviously. And I wanted to talk about what went wrong for fighting games in 2024. Now, there was a lot of things that went right, obviously, but I want to really focus in on why there was so much discourse around things that people weren't happy about with fighting games in 2024 and try to go over some of the major releases. Now, there were a lot of good fighting games that came out this year. There's a lot of good indie fighting games that are on the market, but I wanted to focus on the big releases and how they've shaped the conversation and the perception of fighting games in 2024 leading into 2025. Now, before I get into all of that, I just want to say a massive thank you to the entire community. You guys have really made this it's been a very strange year for me. I didn't expect a lot of the things that were going to happen to my channel to happen. I'm very grateful for all of the colleagues and the peers that I have in this space and all of the people I've been able to interact with. Even the ones I don't get along with, there have been some funny moments. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to everyone in my community that has donated so much and have given me so much over this year. And I'm going to try and provide you with content that you want to see going into 2025. And hopefully we can continue to have a laugh with our favorite fighting games and, you know, dating simulators apparently, and all these other wacky games that we find online. Now, fighting games are notorious for being difficult. They are designed in usually a one-on-one setting and there's no one to help you. You've got no teammates, no one to sort of rely on. They're very daunting for a lot of people, even people that have been playing them for a long time. So I guess developers have tried to find a way to bridge the gap to make people feel a little bit more comfortable. And in doing so, I think it has drummed up a lot of concerns about the future of fighting games and if they are losing what really makes them special at their core. Now, some games that I'm going to talk about here did come out in 2023, like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, but those games either came out midway through 2023 or at the tail end of the year, and a lot of their content has come out in 2024 and a lot of the discussions around these games happened in 2024. So I want to include those as well because I do think they're very important to the fighting game scene and where games might be going in 2025. So the first game that I want to start off with is Street Fighter 6. Now, Street Fighter 6, when it launched, was very positively received, and we got a sales report saying that Street Fighter 6 had sold just over 4 million copies, I believe. So people were very happy with this game initially. I think it looks very beautiful. It's got a very good online service. It's got a decent roster. I wasn't entirely happy with the roster, but that's because there was a lot of legacy characters missing. But of the new characters that came in, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't find them somewhat interesting. And in the beginning, people seemed very happy with Street Fighter 6. It felt like Street Fighter 6 could do no wrong. And then all of a sudden, you start seeing Street Fighter 5 clips popping up most recently. And you're thinking to yourself, Street Fighter 5, of all the games, Street Fighter 5 is the one people are propping up on Twitter and doing combo videos for? Because for the longest time, Street Fighter 5 was considered to be dull, boring, lame, one of the worst Street Fighter iterations out there. It did fix up over time, but the general consensus was that we really want to get away from this game and move on to something else. So why is it that people are now going back to Street Fighter 5 and saying that Street Fighter 5 was a better game than Street Fighter 6? And the reasoning is kind of similar to why they hate Street Fighter 5. They're saying that Street Fighter 6 is dull, boring, a lot of the same situations across the board for all characters. It doesn't feel like there's any real player expression in the game. The game maybe is too easy, as some of the talking points I've heard from some people. Now, even though Street Fighter 6 is in infancy, I still believe that it's a better game than Street Fighter 5. I felt like Street Fighter 5 completely missed the ball, and even though they did fix things up later down the line, I just don't see them in the same light. I think Street Fighter 6 is much better. But one thing that Street Fighter 6 did that really did sour people was a lot of its practices around monetization. The monetization in Street Fighter 6 was not implemented well, and one of the things that I find very strange, apart from the fact that they charge an obscene amount of money for costumes, or at least they did, I'm not entirely sure if they still do, the general consensus doesn't seem to be that positive of monetization from what I was told recently. But aside from that, they seem to give costumes to avatars, which is what people use in the sort of like world tour space or when they're playing with their friends and they're not being serious. Loads of these avatars get these costumes, whereas the main characters that are in the game, they don't get the Baki treatment or the Ninja Turtle treatment. That all goes to things that kind of seems irrelevant to a fighting game, but maybe there's a lot of casual players that play that mode and they're actually paying, and Capcom are getting that money, and that's why they keep on doing it. It seems like a weird choice to me, but maybe it's working. I think another issue Street Fighter 6 is facing is that a lot of its core roster is just not there, and although I think it is good to take a chance on some new characters and see what you can do and build a new roster and try to move the story forward, unlike other games where fighting games are not focused around their stories, people become very attached to characters that they spend hours using. For example, I am somebody that has used Bison historically, and when Bison wasn't in Street Fighter 6 initially, I didn't want to play it, even though I acknowledged that this package is better than what came before it. Because I'd invested so much time into that character, I wanted to use that character, and his playstyle was absent, and so I didn't really want to play the game. I think that's true for a lot of people that maybe used Dudley or Oro or Jung or Yang or some of these older characters like Karin. They're completely missing from the roster, and it can be a little bit frustrating when you invest so much time, because as I said, fighting games are very difficult and they do demand a lot from you. So I think that's one thing that's hurting Street Fighter 6 right now. If I was to include 4 characters into the next season pass, I'd probably go somewhere around Dudley, Karin, Sagat, Oro. Look at some of the characters from Third Strike, because this game is supposed to be after that timeline, which is the first time really they've moved it forward. So maybe even Gil, you can bring Seth back. I'm not entirely sure what the Street Fighter fan base is clamoring for. Those are just the names that come to mind initially. You're missing Shadaloo from this roster. You're missing much of the World Warrior roster in Street Fighter 6. You don't really have any alpha characters here. You know, there's no Cody or anything. So it is lacking in that department. I do think a more beefed up roster would help it. Whilst I do like Terry and Mai's inclusion, I feel like they make sense because of SNK and Capcom's history. I don't think they should be including any other guest characters beyond this point for a very long time. They should focus on their core characters, bring them back, and continue to pay attention to the discourse online, because a lot of people are not happy with the corner situation in Street Fighter 6. They feel like it's too oppressive, and I have heard from a lot of people that the drive rush mechanic is almost like a fuck neutral button, where you don't really play the neutral where Street Fighter is really known for that. You kind of just have this green thing that appears around you, you rush in on somebody and you enforce a mix-up. And I've heard from people that they don't really like it that much. It's becoming very stale and very boring, and it's kind of neutering the nature of Street Fighter. So whilst I'm not too invested in Street Fighter 6 right now, and I do dabble in it here and there, this is just what I'm hearing online, and obviously people are posting the Street Fighter 5 clips online. It does go back to that regular thing that we see in fighting games, where it's like, we're so over, we're back, we're so over, we're back. And it does happen. That is something that happens a lot in fighting games, but I can see the grievances that people have. I just don't think Street Fighter 5 is the game to turn to. Personally, if you're asking me, I think Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 3 are much better games, but to be fair to Street Fighter 6, it's in its infancy. I do think it deserves more of a chance, but I 100% see, and maybe I would get it more if I sat down and played the game, but I can definitely see where they're coming from. So Street Fighter 6, whilst it did get off to a good start, gone through some very turbulent times, but the Steam numbers are extremely high for Street Fighter 6. It is almost uncontested amongst other fighting games. The only fighting game that beat it at the time was Sparking Zero, and that's obviously a Dragon Ball game and a completely different type of fighting game. But on a consistent basis, Street Fighter has remained the top dog, and it is still seen as the king of fighting games. So I'm hopeful for Street Fighter 6 future. I don't think we're going to see too many more controversies for the game for some time. I think it's just the end of the year and people are maybe sick of what they're seeing now, but we'll see what happens with Mai and Eleanor. The next game I want to talk about is Sparking Zero. Now, in the lead up to Sparking Zero was like overhyped almost. It was insane, and I took part in that. Don't get me wrong. You can go through my channel and look for it. Obviously, being a massive Dragon Ball fan, I was going to hype up this game. It's the return of Tenkaichi. Now, Tenkaichi 3 is one of the most beloved arena fighters of all time, probably the most beloved arena fighter. And for 17 years, people had been asking, when are we getting a new Tenkaichi game? Around 17 to 14 years. When are we getting a new Tenkaichi game? When is it coming back? And there was almost radio silence. And we got loads of Dragon Ball media around, between that time, but no mention of Tenkaichi whatsoever. And then out of nowhere, they dropped a bombshell on us. They announced Tenkaichi 4 or Sparking Zero, and people couldn't be more excited. Now, we thought because it's a new Dragon Ball game, the roster is going to be much smaller. We're going to have to pay for all of these characters, and our expectations were subverted when they basically announced every character that existed in Tenkaichi 3, bar a couple of ones like King Vegeta and Pikkon, were going to be playable in this new iteration of the Sparking franchise. So everybody was through the roof. The one massive downer was that there was no crossplay, but I think everybody started to kind of accept that because we had so much cool stuff in the game. What if scenarios, a full campaign mode, a place for people to create their own scenarios, a shop that doesn't require real money and you can buy it in the game, a gigantic roster of almost 200 characters with DLC promised from Daima and Superhero and whatever else they decide to create. You could purchase music in the store, you could purchase clothes, and then a battle system which was meant to mimic what we see in the anime. So what exactly exactly went wrong? Well, to begin with, and I can put my hands up and admit this, we were clamoring for an unbalanced, chaotic mess, and I can now confidently say that was very stupid on our behalf, and it was kind of silly for the developers to push for that as well. The game came out an absolutely broken mess. It was broken across the board, and characters like Yajirobe, Master Roshi, and Videl, who used After Image Strike or could heal themselves with like a Senzu Bean, which is what Yajirobe was doing, were completely dominating the online, and it turned everybody off the game. Nobody wanted to play it. Where you thought you were going to get these massive battles between Omega Shenron and Gogeta Super Saiyan 4 to recreate that magic from Tenkaichi 3, you were getting bombarded with these idiotic characters like Yajirobe who could just heal themselves. On top of that, the online system was just broken across the board. People were rage quitting left, right and center, and people became very frustrated with it. The campaign mode was a massive letdown. Although I wasn't too interested in the campaign because I've played through the Dragon Ball story 100 times, there were a lot of people that were first getting into the series through this game, and even they said it was not a very good showing. So I could see why people were very disappointed with the campaign mode. The what if scenarios were pretty good. The campaigns where you can create themselves, they were also pretty good. They left a little bit to be desired, but they were pretty good. The roster size again was a very good thing, but it was so glitchy and so broken that everybody was just like, do you know what, I don't want to play it. And it lost hundreds of thousands of players. But in an unprecedented turn of events, the developers actually responded to this in record time. They put out a feedback form. People told them what they wanted to see and what they wanted nerfed and buffed, and the developers, for the most part, responded to all of this. A lot of the issues that people had, whether it was with big characters, whether it was with spamming, whether it was unblockables, even rage quitting, this all got addressed. Now the game is not in a perfect state by any stretch of the imagination, and it does still need work, but what I can say is that unlike a lot of the other games on this list, the developers listened and they fixed so much about the game. And I can tell you now, as somebody that still plays Sparking Zero in their spare time, it is a good game and it is worth playing. Now I know a lot of people are not going to go back to it, and although they did leave a really bad taste in people's mouths, at least this spells good signs for Sparking Zero going into the future, because we know the developers are listening, and if we have a problem with something, they're probably going to fix it in a very quick time. This is also the first version of the new line of Tenkaichi games, so I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt because I am genuinely happy with the battle system. Although the game was embarrassed on a world stage with the tournament that they decided to put on when the game was not in a functioning state, I do think since then the fights look a lot better and people are having a lot more fun with the game. Now that tournament they put on was their own fault. They sunk their own game into the ground, and that news went everywhere. Sparking Zero became the laughing stock of, I wouldn't say the fighting game community, because the FGC don't really regard it as a conventional fighting game, even though it is a fighting game, it's an arena fighter. Just people in general were laughing at this game, and it deserved it. You know, as a Dragon Ball fan, it pained me to see it in that state, but I had to make videos on it as well and say, what the hell is going on here? Luckily, the game is in a much better state, so I'm very hopeful for the future of Sparking Zero. Hopefully the Daima and the superhero updates don't bring problems and we just get our hands on our favorite characters. Next up, I want to talk about the very divisive Tekken 8. Now, Tekken 8 had a ton of hype going into it, and that is largely thanks to Tekken 7. Tekken 7 had a very rough start. It had no goodwill with the community or gamers in general because Tekken Tag 2 almost destroyed Tekken. Tekken 7 had a very small budget and it had to claw its way to the top, and it ended up being the most successful Tekken game ever made. So Tekken 8 had a lot of goodwill to work with, and you could see that when this game was being launched, people were so hyped for it, myself included. And when it came out, people initially were very happy with it. But as time went on, because Tekken is a very complex game, people kept on figuring out ways to play the game, and it became very obvious and apparent that the heat system was a massive issue. Now initially when the game was launched, or the game was announced rather, I was in Amsterdam and I saw the 2-token heat system. I saw Nina with guns and I raised my eyebrow immediately and I said, this is going to be a problem. But since then they seem to nerf the heat system, so I said, okay, do you know what, I'm going to be optimistic about this, and I even put out a video saying this is a really good game. But as time went on, I came to realize that video was released a little bit too early because I learned just how egregious the heat system was, and the heat system really dominates all areas of Tekken 8, and that is really what has caused the divide between players. Now there are some people that really like it, and a poll was put out, and I think the casual fan base actually prefer heat to the people that dislike it, so you know, that's fair enough. I'm an old Tekken player, so maybe it's just not for me and I can accept that. But aside from the heat, Tekken 8 launched with a full-fledged story mode that saw the conclusion between Kazuya and Jin that was positively received. They brought back Tekken Ball mode, which people were very happy with. It had a lobby system that people were very happy with. It had an online mode that worked for the most part. It has a jukebox for you to relive Tekken's best music, and it is a very, very beautiful game with loads of character interactions and very, very cool rage arts that work very well within the fights. So what was the big issue with Tekken 8? Well, to start with, Tekken 8 started on an upward trajectory and started to crash very, very quickly. The first sign of this was the Tekken store. Now, we were not told there was going to be a Tekken store. We were told that the game will have an in-game store, and that was it. There was no mention of anything else. In a Tekken talk, they announced the Tekken store, and initially I said, okay, there's a Tekken store there. Let's see how it goes. Let's see what they're charging. Let's see what they're offering. It became very apparent and very obvious to me very quickly that not only did I think the prices for some things were unjustified, but the quality of content in the store was not good. Now, some people might say, well, you just don't need to interact with it. But some people started to get the idea that maybe more content that was just going to be in the base game or shouldn't be charged at a high price would be if the Tekken store was successful. Now, I'm not entirely sure because I don't have sales figures, but I think the Tekken store was doing a pretty decent job in getting money out of people. People were happy to part of their money, which, that's neither here nor there. If people want to part of their money, that's up to them. But personally speaking, it seemed a bit predatory to me. And this was made even worse when the Battle Pass came out. And this pissed people off even more because the premium battle pass, which is the one that you would pay for, is the one that had some of the better content behind it. But when I say better content, I am kind of reaching there. The content in these battle passes was dog shit. There's no other way to really put it. It was really bad. So people weren't happy that they weren't given the full scope of what the game was going to be including or not including. On top of that, going back to the heat system and general balancing, Dragunov was terrorizing people, and there seemed to be no mention of any updates from the developers until Michael Murray came out and said, we're not updating this game for some time in the balancing. During that time, we had new night trainers, we had new glasses, we had advertisements in the stages, and all of this was piling up and really pissing players off. To add insult to injury, the Tekken team decided to go after, or maybe Bandai Namco, I don't know which one in particular did it, but one of them decided to go after modders and shut modders down who were supporting Tekken for a very long time, effectively ending the revenue streams of loads of people that were fans of Tekken that weren't selling costumes, they were just modding costumes and putting them online. Now, this was a very controversial time in Tekken's first year. Some people were like, the modders deserve it. A lot of people like, this is not good. I was one of those people that was like, it's not very good what they've decided to do with the whole modders in Tekken 8. I feel like there was a better way to go about this than just clipping people's YouTube channels and destroying their ad revenue. But you can see that a game that is really regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time, having all of these things added on one at a time in a very turbulent time with fighting games, was going to draw the ire of people. And people went to Twitter to voice their disdain for the situations. Now, people are going to argue on Twitter regardless, but the heat system, balancing issues, and monetization did not help the situation. Now, if the heat system didn't cause enough division, then Clive's inclusion in Tekken 8 certainly did. Clive is a Final Fantasy 16 character and the first guest character for Tekken 8. Now, we already had a guest character from Final Fantasy in Tekken before in Noctis, so when people saw Clive, it caused a massive rift down the scene. Now, I'm one of the people that weren't happy to see Clive. I was looking for something else, maybe Kiryu, Baki, or Yujiro, but my feelings aside, people took to Twitter once again to voice how angry they were about this. But there was a fair amount of people that were happy for his inclusion, and this is where the divide came from. So going into year 2, the Tekken scene does seem to be split down the middle. I'm always going to be hopeful for a new season, and I'm going to try and remain optimistic. They have promised balance adjustments and new moves to characters, so maybe the game will change and heat will change. We'll have to wait and see. And I do think there is something special there with Tekken 8, but it is clouded by a lot of controversies around monetization and heat, so hopefully they can steer it in the right direction. Overall, I think people agree the game is good, but I think lowering the skill ceiling, much like they did in Street Fighter 6, much like they did in Mortal Kombat, and much like they've done in other games, has annoyed people even more in Tekken, because Tekken was always known for being a very complex and nuanced game, and the heat system seems to dominate the entire game, and it is really turned into a 50-50 casino machine. I know that's a very controversial word for some people, but it really is. There are situations in this game where you are forced to guest, and you're forced to basically lay your life on the line, and Tekken diehards don't really like it very much. Some of the new Tekken players do. But that brings me to the final game that I want to mention on here, and that is Mortal Kombat 1. Now, Mortal Kombat 1 did come out in 2023, but much of its content came out in 2024, and boy oh boy was this game controversial. Now, Mortal Kombat 11 was a kind of a strange one for me, because although it's the highest selling Mortal Kombat game of all time, I don't really remember people having nice nice things to say about this game, and yet it sold like crazy. Now maybe that is because of Mortal Kombat 10. Mortal Kombat 10 also the second highest selling Mortal Kombat game of all time. So maybe Mortal Kombat 11 was borrowing some of that goodwill. And to be fair to Mortal Kombat, it is the biggest game in the fighting games genre in terms of sales. So a lot of goodwill is going to be attached to it. It's a massive globally recognized franchise. But Mortal Kombat 1 has started to burn that goodwill, and I think they burnt it all the way out, and I think players have finally reached the end of their road. So what went wrong with Mortal Kombat 1? Well, really the question is what went right with this game? Now when it was coming out, they said that they were going to push out very aggressively. There was going to be a lot of aggressive marketing. You could kind of see when they were advertising this game to us and when we were seeing it for the first time that it kind of had that Injustice tinge to it, and a lot of us assumed, myself included, back in October 2023 I told people this seems like Injustice 3 except they flipped it on its head at the last moment. The game released in a broken state. There were a lot of things missing from the game. People weren't happy with the cameo system. They tried a lot of new things in this game and it didn't go down well. Least of all the multiverse situation with the story mode. They continued to update the game and break it. They continued to release characters in poor states. There was a lack of communication from community managers and just people in charge over at NetherRealm. The online did not function properly for some time. There was no crossplay for a major release, which a lot of people saw as unacceptable. And all in all, it just wasn't a game that people really asked for. Now, Mortal Kombat, out of all the games here, really did take the biggest battering out of everybody, whether it be the community or just the overall player base, because from what I can see, and we don't know this for certain, but it does look like the plug has been pulled. That is the rumor right now, and I wouldn't be surprised. It does kind of follow suit with Mortal Kombat in general, like they tend to not go beyond year 2. I have seen some people saying, did Mortal Kombat die because of woke? No, Mortal Kombat did not die because of woke. I mean, first of all, a lot of people using that word don't even really know what it means. And secondly, there are things in Mortal Kombat where I'm like, that is just a stupid thing to do in the current climate we're in, i.e. Sector and Cyrax. Really just a very odd thing to do. But a lot of people could argue that MKX, by their logic, would be woke. And yet MKX is regarded by a lot of people to be the best Mortal Kombat game of all time. Certainly from a battles perspective, Mortal Kombat 10 really did do a lot of things correct and people love that game. And yet when you look at the story mode and you look at some of the characters, you might be able to apply that woke tinge to it, because you've got Kung Jin, who is basically a gay monk. You've got Cassie basically being forced down people's throats, which is, you know, something that people would use to say, oh, you know, they're pushing female characters, which again is a fair criticism of Mortal Kombat. A lot of the male characters do get dumbed down and the female characters do get pushed. But at the end of the day, although Mortal Kombat 10 did not have a lot going for it in terms of offline modes, it really had nothing going for it in terms of offline modes. And although the story mode was a flop, the gameplay was so impressive that people let that shit go. And that's really what it boils down to in fighting games. If the gameplay can be truly impressive and truly immerse people in what they're trying to do, a lot of people will let things go. There's a lot of things in MKX from a narrative standpoint that I hate. There's a lot of characters on that roster I wish weren't there, but because the gameplay is so good, people let it go. Now in MK1 situation, yeah, they did push a lot of female characters and make male characters dumb or basically useless, and it's very obvious even if people want to deny it. I don't know if woke is the word that I want to attach to it, but it's not good. It's not a good thing with what they've done to MK1. But the main thing is the gameplay in MK1 is, I don't want to say atrocious, I would say it's lazy. It is a lazy design. It is uninspired. Some people might like it and that's completely fine. I don't mind if people like MK1. I'm not there trying to rain on people's parade, but there's a very clear reason why this game didn't do well. Now some people are saying Mortal Kombat 1 was not killed by woke. It was killed by bad gameplay design, bad implementations, and I think I'd probably lean on those guys, although I would say that the implementation of these ideas into Mortal Kombat certainly doesn't help, and the entire tone of the game is just taking a shift that people don't really like. Now if I know NRS and WB, they're already working on the next Mortal Kombat game. So I am hoping and praying, and I'm going to remain hopeful because they did it with MKX, they did it with MK9, they can do it again. And I think they know they've burnt their goodwill. I believe the next Mortal Kombat game will be a good one. I know that's a bold claim to make, and maybe that sounds even crazy coming from me, but you have to remember, these guys like money. Ultimately, Mortal Kombat is there to make WB money. If they release Mortal Kombat 2 or 13 or whatever they decide to call it, in the state that Mortal Kombat 1 was in, with lackluster gameplay, systems that people never asked for, a shit multiverse story, a barely functioning online, modes that are grayed out for a year, and then turn out to be dog shit. That might be the end of the franchise. They could actually end up killing Mortal Kombat. So I have to look at this logically. They have to look at what they did to Mortal Kombat 1. They have to look at how they tanked the franchise's reputation amongst the millions. And they have to look at it and say, okay, we gotta go in a different direction here. Maybe it's not the Mortal Kombat game they want to put out. Maybe MK1 was the game they were proud of. But at the end of the day, at least in this situation, the customer is right. You had something there of MK9, MKX. If you're gonna do another 2D Mortal Kombat game, you do need to focus on what worked and what didn't work. That's just my opinion. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, obviously. A lot of these games are still being played, and we have a lot to look forward to in 2025. We've got Virtua Fighter. We'll have updates for that. I don't think that will be out until 2026, but we're certainly going to see more of the game coming up in 2025, which I'm very excited for. We've got Bleach Rebirth of Souls, which I know is not a normal fighting game for a lot of the people that watch this channel, but it is still a fighting game, and I do like my arena fighter type games. Although I would say Bleach Rebirth of Souls is less of an arena fighter, more of whatever Budokai was, or maybe even the JoJo's games. Regardless, the new Bleach game looks fantastic. I'm very excited for it. We have a new Demon Slayer game. That is an arena fighter game. We have the Hunter x Hunter game coming out. So there are things to look forward to. Even Fatal Fury. Fatal Fury looks absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on that. I don't know how long I'll be playing it for, but I'm very excited for that. And of course, we've got Street Fighter 6 and we have Tekken 8, and they are going to be getting updates in 2025, which could really change the discourse around them. So it's not all doom and gloom. You just got to call it how you see it. But I remain hopeful for a lot of these franchises because they are legacy franchises. They have gone through turbulent times before and they've bounced back. So there's no reason why they can't do it again. Anyways, guys, just to close off this video, I want to say Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you for turning my channel into a massive success. I've already got a lot of things lined up for 2025 that I want to be doing. I've already reached out to some content creators, so there's going to be more debate live streams, more discussion live streams, more videos just discussing fighting games in general. There'll be more footage on my members channel. We've now started uploading on there, so for all the people that are members of the channel, thank you so much. I won't be changing the pricing of the channel. It will still remain at $1.99 no matter how much content I put on there, and I have put up quite a bit recently, and there'll be more coming up in the future. Got a lot of plans and a lot of ideas for this channel, so I just want to say to all of you, whether you love me or hate me or you're somewhere in the middle, thank you so much for rocking with me this year. It's been pretty crazy. You know, there's things that have happened to me outside of YouTube that are really positive because of what you guys have done, and I really appreciate it. You know, I think you're all really cool. So I'll catch you guys in 2025. Take care, have a good new year, and peace.